Comply or die. Comply or die. Comply.
Welcome to GRC Uncensored, an experimental podcast designed to elevate real conversations with GRC professionals, auditors, regulators, and those building programs around it. Your hosts Troy Fine and Elliot Volkman will offer unfiltered conversations that dig into the reality of how governance, risk, and compliance function that are often buried under millions in marketing spend. Now, on to your hosts.
Hello and welcome back to GRC Uncensored. I am your producer, Elliot Volkman, alongside Troy Fine. Unfortunately, Kendra is under the weather, so she will not be joining us today. But we're going to just hand this off for a quick self-introduction to Mr. Stanley. Maybe you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I will maybe kick us off into why we are here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, gents. My name is Stanley Krochik. I am, a GRC professional now for many years. I've been in the security space for probably about 12 years now, with probably approaching 20 years of professional experience in IT and all the things. Currently, I work at a company called Handshake. We're in the EDU tech space, where I'm responsible for everything under the sun that is not technical from the security aspect, all the fun stuff, risk, compliance, third-party risk management, my favorite, customer trust, of course. Yeah, I'm looking forward to chatting with the both of you. This is my first time doing a podcast. I've been wanting to do this for a long time, so all compliance-related activities, we're just going to check that box, right?
Too close to the sun there. So you did say your magic word, which was third-party risk management, or TPRM, and that will be the topic of today. But I did want to be annoying because it is currently February 14th, which is Valentine's Day. And I'm not going to put it on screen, but Troy, would you care to read your poem that you shared today? Or I will do it for you.
Sure. That we're not really in the Valentine's Day spirit here. None of us wore red.
Yeah, no.
I missed the ball on that one. I forgot.
Stanley wore black, so we see how he feels.
Same.
Oh boy, I hope my wife doesn't hit that.
Yeah, but I did write a poem today, and it went, roses are red, violets are blue. Our love is SOC 2 certified, fake and untrue. So
A+ for trying.
I did post it. I posted on LinkedIn. It's a Valentine's Day meme, but it's corny, and I like it, so I went with it.
All right, I do have to. Yes, that is the world that Troy is, the king of GRC.
Good. Is that a good thing?
Yes.
Though? Like, for
yeah,
real?
Of course.
Like, is it going to be king of knowing that SOC 2 is not a certification?
That's not what you're king of. You are the king of GRC memes, and the reality
GRC
is like
meme. Is that a good thing?
Yeah, because who's going to disagree of the three of us that GRC is generally boring and not seen as like the sexiest thing adjacent to cybersecurity? So if you can make it entertaining, interesting, even if it captures the memes, of course, yeah, you got to bring the message to where people want to see it.
Of course, though, my wife never understands.
The
other one I posted the other day, it was the one with the questionnaire, and there was like, like how it looks when you respond to the questionnaire, and then when you provide evidence, it's like a paper airplane, right? It had the fleet of planes for the questionnaire, and then you respond with paper airplanes for the evidence. She's like, I don't get it, but your people get it. I'm like,
that's what matters.
And I tried to explain it, and she didn't get it.
Yeah,
it's probably a good thing. Otherwise, she'd probably be in GRC as well.
I think it depends. Is viewing me as the king. How about that? There you go.
Okay.
You definitely are the king of GRC memes, and I think it's a good thing. I mean, we live in that world today where we need to keep it light, and communication has changed. I can only imagine if you were publishing like 10-page papers, who's going to read that stuff? You know what I mean? Attention span no longer is a thing.
And 10-page paper on low-quality auditors and how we can push back as a
Just 10 pages? Just 10.
Yeah, you're right. Might need 50. Anyways, what are we talking about, Elliot? I forgot.
Third-party risk management. But I want to kind of like skip right to the punchline a little bit, only because of just how it happens to be. And I apologize in advance. Reddit is Reddit. But you were asked for an update, basically, in a cybersecurity section, of all places. And it is relevant to this conversation, but like typically we'd probably navigate towards this part of the conversation. So I'm just going to jump right ahead. because Stanley, this is going to be pretty relevant to your territory and what we were probably going to pick your brain on is like there are low quality audits, which results in low quality documentation. And from a third party risk management perspective, the short answer or short question of it of if you get a low quality document from a low quality firm or where it came from, is there a pushback? Are you able to reject it? What happens in those scenarios? And then there's a little bit more to unpack after that.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, at the end of the day, the business got to do what the business got to do, right? And we all understand that. The reality is when somebody says jump, unfortunately, we got to say how high, right? And when we receive low quality SOC 2 reports, which the reality is happening more and more due to tooling out there that kind of enables this behavior, we have to really look at the risk that the vendor poses to the organization. If someone wants to buy a tool, is providing basic training, and they're using a low quality auditor, the reality is I'm probably going to let them know you guys got to do better in the future, but I'm going to review it and let it go, right? I have to learn to pick my fights. I don't want to, security always has this reputation of being a blocker. And that's the last thing I want, because I really hate when people say security is a blocker, because eventually people just throw that up the ladder and then I have some executive barking at me like, why are you blocking this? But in the converse of that, we do get tooling nowadays that is a little bit more serious, especially with AI. And when I say serious, I mean that the risk is higher. They may be gathering information from our customers, or they may have access to customer data, which is at the end of the day, that's the crown jewels that we want to protect. And when there's proliferation of vendors, it's really hard to keep track of all that. And at the end of the day, any report that we're getting from anybody, any company can be breached. These reports, give us just a slight visibility into the organization's security posture.
I have a
Go
question.
ahead. Yeah.
I guess when you're doing your third-party security reviews, you're looking at SOC 2. SOC 2, like what weight does a SOC 2 report play in that risk assessment of a potential vendor that you're trying to purchase? Is it low weight? Is it medium weight, high weight? Is it, just something we don't really have time to kind of review in detail? So
Today it's, especially when you start building out programs, to step back just a little bit. One of the things that I do for organizations, I come in and usually work at organizations that are looking to mature their programs. Sometimes they don't have programs, right? So I'm there to help build it for them. So I have to start somewhere. And the reality is we start with SOC 2. That's just like the gold standard, at least here in the United States. In Europe, there's ISO, but that's just, we have to start somewhere. So I'm going to build a program, and I'm going to build it around a program where I'm looking for a SOC 2 attestation. I try to bolster that with getting like maybe a pen test to help support that. But that's where I got to start. Eventually, I'd love to, buy tooling that allows me to, if there's API integrations and data is traveling, I'd love to be able to monitor that. But that's like when your maturity program goes up to something like, from a level of 0 to 5, we're looking at 3 to 4, right? So when we're starting at level 1, it really starts with SOC 2. So the weight there is on the higher side. And then it kind of goes back to what are they accessing? So when I open up that SOC 2, I'm looking at a couple of things, right? Obviously, I want to make sure the period for the SOC 2 is more recent. If it's something from a couple of years ago, I'm like, what are you sending me here? Security postures changes daily, right? So give me something more recent. I'm looking for qualified versus unqualified opinions. Then I start looking at, section 4, where I'm looking at, what are we looking at here? Are there inquiries? Are there observations? What is actually in there, right? If there's a bunch of, hey, we looked at our policy and, moving on, I'm like, this is not an ISO, right? This is SOC 2. You need to do some testing of their controls and make sure that they're working effectively. And then I started looking into those actual controls, especially around change management. Those are ones that I'm usually interested in. And rarely do I see anything good in there, to be honest. I just saw, I won't name the company, but I just saw an actually good SOC 2 where I was like, ooh, I'm going to incorporate some of this into my own into my own compliance program.
Hey, if it's good, you can call it out. You can also call it bad if it's bad, but.
Okay. I'm not going to, because I just said I'm taking stuff from them.
Oh, well, okay. All right,
I'm not
fair.
taking it. I'm getting good ideas from what I saw. And I was
Just
like, I want to,
inspiration.
yeah, I'll call it exactly what I'm adding to my, so I'm actually in my audit right now. I'm being audited right now. I'm almost done. And I just saw like something around branch protection rules. I saw that in their audit and I was like, I actually haven't seen that really anywhere else. I'm like, this is good. We do this. Why shouldn't I get credit for this? If I see an exception around, oh, someone didn't sign their code of conduct, 1 out of 25 people didn't do it. The truth is, I really don't care. I'm just being honest here. Okay, someone didn't do it. Sure, the organization doesn't have strong technical controls about enforcing that prior to onboarding. Okay, we all want to be ethical, but the reality is people just check the box. They just sign, I got a job, cool, let's move along. But change management, when I see exceptions around that, which is very rare, which makes me feel like organizations are not, again, their compliance programs should be very strong, because that should be there. Code reviews, branch protection, all that should be enforced, and that should be in your program. And when I see that, I really like that. But I don't see enough of that. And, you know, when I look at these programs and you talk about, wait, it's all I got. Like, I really try to either elevate or reduce the risk of a vendor that we're considering onboarding based on that information there.
So when you get a SOC 2 report though, and you see certain firms doing it, do you have a certain, like an instant, like,
Sorry.
if for those of you listening, Stanley just pretended he threw up in his mouth. So I'm guessing they will see this too, but some people might just be listening. You have like a first impression where it's just like a bad, it's like you said, like a bad taste in your mouth, like right off the wall. Does that?
Yeah.
And is there a reason why?
Except I'm seeing more of that. That's why. And there's a trend happening that we are all alluding to, and which is why we're talking about it, right? There's a trend of some companies becoming more of a sales-focused tool versus an actual compliance-focused tool, and looking at maturing programs, right? We look at GRC, right? Someone I used to work with kind of talked about, we really want to go from the G to the R to the C, right? Instead, we're kind of starting with C and going backwards. And the reality is, it's okay to start with the C, but the C can't go to the S, to the sales focus. You gotta start with the C, and you gotta go up to improving and maturing risk and focusing on governments and building that up from bottom up. We'd love to go top down, but that's the reality of the situation. We're not doing that. And that's okay, because we gotta start somewhere, but we gotta then go to the R, then go to the G, have those difficult conversations. The reality is, a lot of especially small companies, they start with the C and then they just stay there and they go to sales. And that's satisfactory, because most of these organizations don't have people like myself working for them to help hold the organization accountable and say, all right, we build a compliance program, now let's mature, right? Now let's start talking about risk. Let's have those difficult conversations. Oh, you want to procure something? It's kind of risky. Do you want to accept this risk? Have those kind of conversations where it results in a risk acceptance ultimately, and hold management accountable. The reality is, no one wants a piece of paper in front of them that requires you to accept that risk. I get it. No one wants to be accountable at the end of the day, but we have to have those difficult conversations, because sometimes the organizations are actually making really risky kind of decisions, and we just have to have that conversation. Kind of coming back to some of these organizations that are shilling their services to help get you across the border really quickly, at a very small price. I'll give you some examples. I do a little consulting on the side, and I see what some of these solutions charge. I see the quality of the audits. There's a lot of just, here's all my documentation through some of these sales-focused, I don't even want to call them GRC tools, but we will, just because I don't know what else to call them. But they're sales-focused GRC tools. And they low cost, low quality, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we live in a very expensive world where how am I going to be paying 10, 12, 15K for auditing and tooling? No way. You're not getting quality. Sometimes that work is also offshored, which also reduces the quality of the result at the end of the day. So I'm seeing more and more of these companies who have partnered with some of these sales tools. And, it's at the end of the day, I think people like myself, people like the both of you are kind of waking up and saying, wait, hold on a second. What are you guys creating? You created a monster ultimately, right? And some people might say when they're going to listen to this, oh, this guy sounds threatened by these companies. I'm not, because when I see small companies sending out these reports and I'm just like, I'm not going to accept this. I'll accept it today, maybe because just to help you, but I'm going to hold you accountable. It's like a risk acceptance it's time bound. It's a time bound accepted risk. You have 1 year to fix this and improve. Because when you come back to me next year and you give me that exact same report and I see no maturity, I'm going to say, look, you had an opportunity. Now I'm going to not allow this to pass through. So
I've got one more thing to stretch on what you were talking about here.
Sure.
So this goes back to, I guess, your post, Troy, for 3 years ago. And we also have an upcoming
Archives.
episode to sort of unpack some of this. But SOC 2 specifically, AICPA has some oversight, maybe. I don't remember the language, but they obviously provide reviews and like oversight of the CPA firms and like their quality standards and stuff of that nature. But there is a specific question and call out that you had from years back of there are now technology vendors who are like just lobbing the audit directly into the package. We even had a conversation with Kevin from Drata who made it pretty clear that is problematic. But like the specific rules, and there's like a huge long document that AICPA put out, and they've put out a memo like a year and a half, 2 years ago, reiterating this problem. But the audit independence piece of this, how important is that to you, regardless of the oversight and all that? Is that a contributing factor? Is it a problem? The specific question that we've been asked was essentially, have you ever rejected it because of that? Or is it more ingrained as like philosophically that is a part of the bigger picture and the problem of everything you just spoke to?
Yeah, the lines are being blurred here, in my opinion. I'm not an auditor, never was one. Have respect for auditors because it is a tough job. But at the end of the day, even there, like you as an organization have partnered with some of these tools, and now it's like there's got to be a separation of duties. It's part of compliance, right? There's like segregation of data, segregation of duties. There's a reason for that. I recently, as I've started seeing this proliferation of these low quality reports, I started looking at AICPA's website for the peer reviews. Guess how many of those companies have been peer reviewed?
Probably all of them.
No, none of them. I've seen 0 peer reviews for a lot of these low quality auditors. Some of them are probably newer, which also
you have 18 months when you issue your first attestation report.
Got it. I'm gonna, after we're done, I'm now gonna go check on some of them because now.
And if they're not a U.S. CPA firm, and that can
loopholes.
be their ball game.
Okay, interesting. Okay, I wonder where some of these companies are registered, not in Delaware. I'll have to take a look at that. I've checked several of them. I've only found one of my auditors, and I'm not talking about the big fours or actual like well-known. I'm talking about ones that are just like popping up left and right now.
If they're new, might not.
Yeah, which also is If like someone woke up one day and said, hey, I'm gonna take advantage of this, and it's like a rug pull in crypto. I'm just gonna try to get in and make some money, and then when the AICPA comes and says, hey, what you're producing does not meet our standards, cool, I'm just gonna a new company.
I personally think, though, I think if there is going to be change, or if there really is bad stuff being put out there, I keep going back to the companies blaming you, because I think your resources are limited, and you also have other political
That's a good point.
clout that you have to deal with internally. But I feel like the organizations have to say, we don't accept this report. It doesn't mean you can't use the vendor. It just means now we have to do A, B, C, D, and E, and F in order to get comfort over the risk, because we don't rely on your SOC 2 report. Now, if a company is just saying, we just want your SOC 2 report, we're doing the same thing regardless. We're doing the other same procedures, whether we have a SOC 2 report or not, then they're not going to ever
Change.
kind of do that, right? Because they're just saying, okay, give me a SOC 2 report. I'm still going to do A, B, C, and F, G, whether you have a SOC 2 report or not. But you need to, I guess, why aren't companies using a SOC 2 to reduce risk in order so they don't have to do as much due diligence? Or do they just not, inherently, it's just a checkbox, and we just need to do it from a liability standpoint to make sure all of our vendors have a SOC 2 report.
Yeah, everything you said is correct, by the way, starting with the fact that resources are limited, right? For more context and color, I'm the only person who runs GRC at my organization. I have a colleague who's responsible for some other things who's on my team, who does like with vulnerability management. But generally speaking, I'm doing all of customer trust, all of third-party risk management, all of compliance, and building up those programs, right? I'm relatively stretched, and it's hard to then say, all right, I'm going to hold the line. And then as a result of holding the line, I now have to do A, B, C, D, E, and F. And what is A, B, C, D, and F, right? I'm going to send them my favorite questionnaires. No way. I'm not going to do that. I will accept an industry standard, but I'm not going to go and ask for a custom questionnaire. Furthermore, I'm not going to bake in customer rights to audit, right? I'm not going to bake that into the contract, because then I have to go and audit somebody. That would require us to invest into additional resources. I know there's third-party solutions out there that kind of focus in this space, which now that we're talking about this, maybe an area where, as an additional solution, to outsource that a little bit. And yes, we should be better. And that's as we mature programs, like I mentioned earlier. At the end of the day, getting like a tool that's going to help track where the data flows, right? Because if this is a if this is a low risk vendor based on just because they don't even have data, I don't really care that much. Exactly. But if you are integrating with GitHub, or if you have an integration with GCP, I care a lot. If data is flowing, I care a lot. And especially with AI coming, I definitely care a lot. But I can't depend on the vendors to provide me an attestation that is like valid and it's 100% reflective of what they're doing. I can't just trust but verify, right? Or never trust and always verify, depends. So zero trust ultimately. But in order to get to that level, I need technology. I would need to make an investment need to get a software solution to help me track the data, right? There's a lot of tools out there that are in this space, like DSPM tools and whatnot, to help track where the data is flowing. That's probably the next level of maturity. That way, send me whatever you want. I'll look at it. But at the end of the day I'm going to track where the data is going and actually look at it from a technical perspective. This is ultimately an administrative control, right? I need technical controls in place.
But if you ever had a vendor you care about, a new one, and they provide your SOC 2 report, and it's a firm that you don't trust. It's not a firm that you've lost trust in, but you care about that vendor because they're getting access to sensitive data. It sounds like you want to be able to push back a little bit. Your hands are kind of tied.
Yeah, and that did just happen actually. And we had a AI tool, of course, that will integrate with our infrastructure. They will get access to, so it's integration with the customer support tool. And ultimately they get access to, they integrate with Zendesk, and there could be plenty of sensitive information there. And the reality is I had some concerns because when I cracked open their SOC 2, it was from one of these low quality auditors using one of these sales GRC tools. And I had concerns right away. I brought it up to the security and infrastructure team, and we had a whole conversation about it. And I said, hey, look, we need to look at this a little more closely. Here's my concerns. And it's literally me telling them exactly what I'm telling you guys. And they're like, what's the problem? I can't really trust the legitimacy of this attestation. I just can't, because I've seen some of these tools. I've worked with them. I know how, at least visibly understand how they function. They provide me a lot of metadata. How do I trust that metadata? I want to see the raw data, right? I want to actually understand how things are functioning. When I see that AWS has, secure passwords for administrator, like, how do I know this is actually correct? So I told them, like, look, we need to look at this a little more closely. So I had a conversation with the vendor. We went back and forth. Ultimately, I got their director of engineering on the call. I spoke to them. I explained to them my concerns here. He seemed to take it seriously. You never really know. And there was a risk ultimately that was accepted to some extent. We did a POC with them, and this is very recent, so we haven't actually fully procured the tool. But I let them know you cannot send. This has to be siloed. You can't send any kind of customer data yet into here. If you want to procure this, we'll have to have an additional conversation. I will say though, in addition to actually looking at these reports, when I'm looking at vendors that are higher risk, in my opinion, I escalate that to the cloud security team. I escalate it to the infrastructure team to make sure that they are aware, that they feel comfortable. So I'm ultimately the gateway or the gatekeeper to some extent when it comes down to procurement. And then for a small subset of our vendors that I consider high risk, I'll do like an architecture review where I'll say, all right, you are trying to procure a tool that we have deemed high risk. Now it needs to be reviewed by cloud security. It needs to be reviewed by infrastructure. So I'll have a larger conversation. I'm not going to just do this by myself because I'm relatively technical, but I really want to make sure that the rest of the organization feels comfortable with this. Even with tools that have a higher quality auditor, I will escalate it to engineering to make sure that they feel comfortable, because then we have to have a discussion about the integration. How will the data flow? They need to be involved. So that's one level up on how I'm trying to mature third-party risk management to make sure that I'm not doing this by myself. I want to be mindful of their time because I don't want to waste their time on nonsense.
So to me, it sounds like whether it's high risk or low risk, you still have to escalate it. I mean, whether it's a high quality audit firm or a low quality audit firm, on the risk of the vendor, you're still going to escalate it regardless. So the SOC 2 report in those situations almost has to just be a checkbox, right? I mean, because if you have to escalate it, which is probably the right thing to do because it's high risk, but the SOC 2 report shouldn't be the sole reason why you get comfort over security risk, right? That just should never be the case. I guess that's kind of the point I'm trying to make, right? Is like, we want people to push back and do things, but like at the end of the day, why would the business push back on that low? Why would your security team say, yeah, and you're right, we don't trust that audit firm either. Guess what, business? Now we're going to send in and make this a 6-month process to get this vendor instead of a 1-month process. Are you okay with that? By the way, it's AI that we need because we feel like it's going to jumpstart us and get us ahead of our competitors. Like, it almost feels like SOC 2, like the inevitability of SOC 2 or the end story is, to me, the business will always force it to kind of just be what it is, which, do you have a SOC 2 report or not? No matter how much LinkedIn posts we make, no matter how much we try to push back, usually the high-risk vendors are the ones the business wants the most.
Yeah. That I have seen that. We had some tooling that was looking to get direct access to some information, and at the end of the day, it wasn't even a security thing. It was like, hey, infrastructure, hey, engineering, how are you going to engineer this to make sure that we are protected? We can't just have direct access to certain things. Yes, SOC 2 has become democratized.
Commoditized.
Sorry. It's become commoditized, and it's just during COVID, the procurement of software skyrocketed, right? People needed to be able to continue to do business, and they couldn't go into the office. So we're like, hey, how are we going to make this work? Business still needs to continue. And I think a lot of it was like propped up by the ZIRP, like zero interest period, right? People giving out money. Companies needed to take that money, invest it in themselves. Oh, how can I sell this tool? You need a SOC 2, right? Because that's just like the gold. That's step zero. You have no SOC 2.
Table
How
stakes.
much? I'm sorry.
It's table stakes.
That's exactly right. It's table stakes. You have to have that because there's nothing else that exists at the moment. You're going to send me your cake or your SIG. The reality is that's even worse because no one even reviews the answers there. There's no third party that is attested to, right? So that third party attestation that comes from an auditor, that just shows the vendor, it shows the customer that, oh, someone else is attested to your control. So we're going to accept that. But like when all of a sudden there has been a massive uptick in SaaS sales, auditors, oh, great, we need to produce these faster because there's a high demand, right? I mean, just basic economics at that point. So auditors, which will probably explain why Drata and Vanta like really blew up. I mean, like they blew up because there was a high demand from these smaller companies that came up during the ZIRP period, and they're like, oh, there's just high demand. We need to then service this demand. We got to be producing these at a faster pace, which ultimately reduces the quality of the reports. I think that, what Drata and Vanta did a couple of years ago, going in 4 years ago, was an incredible thing, right? To help these companies. There's a place for them in the world, right? I believe that place is for smaller companies that are being helped to get started somewhere. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's up to the companies after a year or two as they're maturing to not accept what is being provided from these tools and their auditors and say, all right, we're growing, we're selling. Now let's invest into GRC a little bit more. Let's get someone into our organization to help us mature. And that could be with these tools, or it's, these tools are not doing what they need us to do. We need something better. We need something that's a little bit more mature that reflects our security posture. We've matured, the HR function. We've matured the IT function. Oh, we need something a little better, right? So ideally, you'd be moving to something more mature as a tool. Anecdotes is out there, Hyperproof is out there. There's a lot more mature tools, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, I think though, as you grow, you need something that meets you where you are, not you meeting the tools where they are, which is, I think, part of what's being lost in this growth phase of GRC, right? You can't become content with the tools you have. You need to move away from a sales-focused program to an actual risk-based program. That needs to happen.
Yeah, risk-based would be the way to go. And that's hard to accomplish, again, due to resource constraints and everything. But I guess, what maybe SOC 2 should just be, no one's going to like me saying it. I'm just going to say it. What if SOC 2 is just supposed to be a checkbox? What if that's the purpose of it? And what if that is the way it should be? I'm just kind of throwing that out there, but kind of playing devil's advocate, but like we talk about it not being a checkbox, and I've talked about it a lot too, but like, I guess all I'm saying is, yeah, checkbox is a vague term, right? What I think is a checkbox is way different than a person charging $5,000 and different than a person charging $50,000, right? We all have different ideas of what that checkbox looks like anyway, but if it's just going to be used to check a box by the market, why are we treating it any differently?
I mean, it's like you mentioned, it's table stakes. You got to start there though, right? But this can't be just it. I think in order for change to happen, some of these companies need to have data breaches. Something bad has to happen. And I'm saying bad, relatively speaking. Some of these companies, smaller companies, need to have data breaches, and then it can't be just one or two. Something needs to happen that really affects buyers. The reality is none of that's happened yet. So as we're talking through this, because I'll be honest, this is like a new thought for me. If it hasn't happened, that means companies are doing something right. Maybe that's a question.
I think it has happened. What I think hasn't happened is that no one's tying it to a significant financial impact, right? I mean, United Health Group, right? They had a huge breach, if you recall, in 2024, right? All the huge ransomware. Healthcare providers couldn't get paid. So that one became front story news because a lot of people lost a lot of money.
I mean,
However, and that was because it was mainly because it was an availability issue. They had to take down their systems. I have a small doctor's office. I can't get money. I can't get paid. Oh no, that's not good. So it all was tied back to the availability of their systems being unavailable. I can't get paid. It's a money issue. If you just have data stolen from you, do you know where the financial risk comes in? If you get sued. You know how long it takes to get sued? And for that to happen, and then you have insurance that'll probably, maybe, help you cover that cost. And even if you do get sued, you probably have good attorneys that can lower that cost and blah, 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 blah. So it's really hard to tie it to a financial impact if it's just, we had a huge breach. Even if there's a huge class action lawsuit, it takes so long and,
I'll play devil's advocate with your example. So the big difference in, coming from government, I spent 10 years in local government and statewide government. The difference in UHG and the breaches that we read about and the ones that I'm referring to right now is we're talking about old school brick and mortar, archaic systems, and very large, massive institutions that have a hard time modernizing their infrastructure versus SaaS companies that live in AWS or GCP where they may be using cloud native. So the difference between your example, and I hear you, that's very different. Those are very serious breaches, and that's where the money is, right? I'm going to call, IBM publishes reports every year, and the most expensive type of record is like PHI. We all know that. Like the average cost of PHI is like $400+ for a breach. In tech, it's, depending on what kind of tech you're in, obviously, a lot of these companies that we're referring to, they're probably lower risk, and malactors, they're not as interested in them. They're, nation states, malicious actors, they're looking at government. They're looking at low-hanging fruit, in my opinion. When you're working at some of these old school organizations that have old school infrastructure, managing their own data centers, they don't have the right people working in there. Those people have been there for 10, 15, 20 years. They're not keeping up with modern technology. So their infrastructure is outdated, unsecure, low-hanging fruit. It's easy to be cherry-picked. some of these tech companies, they're natively secure. They have usually fairly strong change management programs that prevents them from just doing things. A lot of tools out there that help with, like just-in-time access to prevent direct access to infrastructure. So some of the things they're already doing is just natively secure without us even like thinking about it. They've ultimately, I hate to use this buzzword, but they shifted left, right? Just naturally. I think that's probably part of the problem, Troy, that they're just getting the SOC 2 to check the box, so then their sales folks can go to buyers and say, hey, we got a SOC 2, we're good, cool, thanks for that.
Yeah, the buyers don't see a risk in using a low quality audit firm to do the audit.
Correct, because there's no one on their side that's going to challenge her, because how do we start the conversation? Like, someone up top is just going to say, they're not going to say, you can't buy that, go buy that. Ship fast, right? You got to move fast.
Yes. And the other thing is, going back, I believe though, if the market, I guess users of the report, start pushing back, and certain firms, their oversight entities need to take note of that, right? Because ultimately it hurts their members. So all CBA firms are are part of, or it hurts the SOC 2 brand, I guess is what I'd say, right? So the oversight bodies don't want that to happen, because that ultimately would hurt the revenue of their members who are part of that organization. And it's kind of a, we're all
almighty dollar. It's all about money at the end of the day for everybody, right?
So they're not going to do anything unless somebody makes them do something. That's kind of my theory there. And so that's kind of what I always come back to. My phone just thought I said Siri, but I said theory. Right.
There's a theory about why Siri's listening.
That's kind of what I think. I think they got to be forced to do something about it. Otherwise,
that would require us to walk up there with pitchforks, man. I mean, all the GRC folks got to come there and say, no more, no more.
But they're not going to do that, because
too much pressure.
Why would they do that? Like, what's the risk to them?
None. There really isn't any. I mean, at the end of the day, if they start pushing back too much, they're going to get replaced with somebody else they're going to get S-canned, and then someone else is going to come say, all right, what do you want me to push through? Cool. I mean, look, in my current role a year ago, like, I saw what the third-party risk management program looked like, and calling it one is probably me being generous. It wasn't a real strong third-party risk. It existed. It was there, but it's night and day between what it was before and what it is today. And at the end of the day, the buyers at my organization were very frustrated for the longest time. It takes time for them to get used to it and understand the process, and a lot of it's education and enablement, and I'm all about that. I spend time with especially the buyers at my company who buy the most, right? I'm trying to make them comfortable with what's happening and help them understand. At the end of the day, I have my own compliance requirements, right? And we haven't even talked about like supply chain risk management as a whole, right? I mean, there are obligations that we're going to need to meet, because at the end of the day, we're like daisy chain companies, right? There's third party, there's fourth party, and then the nth party, right? That just continues. And that connection between all of us exists. We are all like 1 degree of separation from each other, because we're all using AWS, GCP, Azure, right? And we're all connected. And I'm trying to help our buyers and my organization understand that. And in order to reduce the friction, because I am very big in making sure the friction is limited, because I want the user experience to be good at our company. So like I try to make it as easy as possible. I have to, because people are going to, like you mentioned, people start complaining about me, right? And I have to make sure that I have a family to feed as well, right? So I have to find that balance of doing my job, doing it well, but also understanding the risk. So that's just the reality of the situation. But let me flip it to you, Troy. I mean, aside from us running it with pitchforks and protesting, what do you see the solution being in the next 3 to 5 years? Are we just going to continue status quo?
No, that I do think it'll continue. But I think if it wants to change, I would say that big companies, maybe even bigger than your company, I mean like big players, right, that have a lot of leverage and their security team has a lot of leverage, they need to have a block list firms. Not just SOC 2, ISO, PCI, everything and everything in between. A block list of firms. And maybe not a block list, but here's the firms we need to, maybe we'll accept the report, maybe we won't. But if they're using these guys, we got to do these other procedures because we don't trust the report as much as other firms. If they're using these guys, we'll do less because we have more trust in that report. But there's other factors. Maybe it's a really high risk vendor. And like I said before, the SOC 2 report doesn't really matter to us. They're so high risk. We got to do all these other procedures regardless. SOC 2 report is just a checkbox. I think there needs to be conversations internally at companies. There needs to be policies as part of the vendor risk management program where everybody's on the same page. And these are the rules. And we follow these rules. Maybe there's exceptions. There's always exceptions to rules, but that's where I would start. And once everyone's on the same page, like this is it. Like when you're going to procure, after their SOC 2 report buyer, see if one of these firms is on there and understand that this process might take a little longer because that's our policy. And I think people were all on the same page and everyone understood that. You'd have you, even yourself, would then have a way to push back. It's our policy. Guys, I'm sorry I have buy-in from the business. This is our policy. Here's why we're doing it. Now you'll start to see change. That's the only way I think it'll happen.
Troy, the idealist. I love that. No, I mean, I'm all for it.
I didn't say it was realistic.
Yeah, I was going to say, I love ideology, to be honest with you. In a perfect world, even communism works. But the reality, the reality is the business is never going to do that. There has to be an incident that happens at the organization. They have to feel the pain. That's the reality. The pain needs to be felt a little bit from something that has happened where one of their vendors comes back to them and say, hey, we had a security incident and some of your customers' data was breached. Then the business will pay attention. And we all know that we want to be as proactive as possible in security to prevent this and be able to foresee risks being realized. But we all know we are reactive, and not we, organizations are reactive. They wait for something to happen. They wait for a risk to materialize. And then they're like, okay, what are we going to do about this now? First, they're going to point fingers at people and say, why did this happen? That's why it's good to document and have risk acceptance forms. And hey, you wanted this vendor, right? So that way you're not being thrown under the bus, even though still be thrown under the bus. And the reality is, I think something needs to happen at each organization for them to realize, okay, we can't just be buying any tool we want. And until like management feels that pain, it's gonna be status quo. And the reality is one organization at a time as these things happen, that's how change will happen. In my opinion, I mean, they just need to feel their feet need to be in the fire a little bit.
I think though, if I was an internal GRC and there was a major breach and they used a firm, everyone knew.
That's a good one.
And they said, GRC team, why didn't you tell us they were bad? Like, why did we accept this? I wouldn't want to protect myself from that if I was
for sure.
GRC.
And I will say, as part of my own program that I'm going to be maturing after this audit is over, because I've kind of built out the fundamentals and the core of the program. Because I do ask, as part of third-party risk management, I do ask a few questions. I'll get the SOC 2, I'll get a pen test. I'll ask if they've had an incident, what their incident management program is like. I'll ask a couple other questions, just keep it very light. But the next part of that is, do you use any of these sales tools? Are you using one of these auditors on this list? Yes. Okay. I'm going to allow it for now, but I'm going to track that there very closely. And then internally, I'll publish information. Here are the list of auditors, as you've mentioned, but it's all internal, right? Like these are the ones that we consider higher risk because of X, Y, and Z. If you are a lower risk vendor using this, we'll let it slide, but we will keep an eye on it. If you're higher risk, we will have a conversation about it. But like I mentioned, risk acceptance, it's time bound. Next year, I will want to see significant improvement. So that's how I see my program being built out, because you got to start somewhere, right? You can't be an ideologist, Troy. I mean, you've been in the game for a long time, so I get it. But for folks like myself, and there's many of them out there, building third-party risk management programs, and got to start somewhere. That's why we always start with SOC 2. But like organizations procuring these tools who are a little smaller, you got to start somewhere, but you can't be complacent. You can't be content. You got to evolve that over time.
When I was saying my idea, I was talking about the big companies that already have maturing third-party risk management programs. Like,
I would love to see what they're doing. Obviously, like I'm in a startup space. I'm in, Series E or F company. But let's look at LinkedIn, for example, or people in that, companies in that level. I'd love to know about their programs.
We would love to get a panel of people at bigger companies and third-party risk and ask them very similar questions like this and see how they're doing it, because they're the ones I think that can make the change.
I mean, the reality is, Troy, we, all three of us, I imagine, have access to this pool of people. I know I do, at least. I'm happy to reach out and see if anybody's interested in like a fireside chat type of thing where we have a conversation. I would love to know what they're doing, because if they're doing the same thing I'm doing, they got to be better at the end of the day. Their stakes are way higher than mine.
Yeah.
So I'm, after we're done chatting here, I'm more than happy to reach out and see if anyone is up for the challenge, throw down the gauntlet and just have a conversation, because I don't know what they're doing. But I'm very curious about it, because these companies have way larger GRC teams. They have like orgs, right? And they have people, they hire someone just to do third-party risk management. That's it. That's all they do. And I want to talk to that person. I want to know what your week looks like and what you're doing. Because if you're just doing what I'm doing, there's a problem here. And I would agree with you on that.
That's a good spot to end, Elliot.
That takes us to the end of this episode. I think this hopefully answered some of the initial questions that we got. Your 3-year-old post has officially been updated. Maybe we can give you a meme version of that. Stanley, thank you so much for joining and providing your perspective. That was very much needed. But yeah, I think there's a part 2 in the future, or 3. There's a few different flavors. That's it, though. We have officially kicked off the full season of GRC Uncensored. We'll be back with more. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to GRC Uncensored, the podcast, where Troy and Kendra know shit, and our producer just talks shit. To learn more about GRC, go to grcuncensored.com, subscribe to our newsletter, or join our community on Reddit. Viewpoints expressed during the show do not reflect the brands, employers, or companies of our hosts, guests, or sponsors.